Hope all of you will be fine. And in our today's lecture, we will come to know about the different processes which are also associated with our buccal cavity. In our previous lecture, we came to know about the process of digestion and about the process of the chewing which took place in our buccal cavity. And before starting our today's topic, which will be focused on the process of mastication and it is nervous regulatory control, and the process of swallowing or the deglutition, let me know you about two important things which are associated with our digestive system. Number one term is hunger and number second is appetite. There are most of the persons who are of the opinion that these two terms are just like the two sides of the same coin, but the things are different. So far as the medical terminology is concerned, then these are two different things or two different concepts. When we talk about the hunger, then we should know that it refers to that state which is associated with our digestive system in which we develop an intrinsic desire for food. So, hunger refers to intrinsic, please remember it carefully, it refers to intrinsic desire for food, but I have not write down here any typification of the food, any specific food. I have write down food non-specifically. So, that state which is associated with your digestive system in which you develop intrinsic desire for food, that constitutes the hunger, but appetite is something different. When we talk about the appetite, then we say that it is a state in which a particular type of food, is seeked preferentially by a person. Here a particular type of food is being seeked by you preferentially. So, this state is different from that state. Hope you got it well. Now, let us focus on our today's main topic, that is mastication and swallowing. You know, so far as our previous lecture is concerned, we discussed a little bit about the process of mastication when we discussed the process of the digestion which took place in our buccal cavity. This process of mastication is also called as chewing. It is also called as chewing. And you know, chewing is that process in which we grind or chew the larger food particles mechanically into the smaller food particles by making use of our different these dentines or teeth. And you know that once we take some food particle and incorporate that into our oral or the buccal cavity, when we take a solid format of the food, then our respective or different types of the cheek muscles come into force or come into play. Their contractions ultimately lead to lifting of our lower jaw against the upper jaw, and our lower jaw can be lifted up against the upper jaw, which can result in the process of grinding or chewing or mastication. That lifting of our lower jaw against the upper jaw is a very forceful lifting, and we can lift our lower jaw to such an extent that we can exert or develop a force of more than or around 55 pounds over our incisors. Hope you are getting it well. And we can put a force of around or more than, we have this ability, 200 pounds over our molars. Are you getting or not? See here carefully. When you have taken a food item and you have incorporated that into what? Into your oral cavity, then you will make use of your cheek, or different cheek muscles are there, and when you are making use of the same which are in your voluntary control of your nervous system, then by making use of same types of the cheek muscles, you are lifting your lower jaw forcibly against the upper jaw, so that lower teeth will come against the static upper teeth and they will grind or chew the food particles, and with a greater force, and you can develop or you can put a force of more than 55 pounds over your incisors from the lower side, and you can put a force of more than or around 200 pounds over your molars from the lower side of your jaw, or from the or with the help of your lower mandible. And this process of mastication or the chewing then ultimately leads to conversion of what? Conversion of larger food particles. Since say you have taken the larger solid food particles, and by making use of this force or this amount of the force, you have grinded these food particles or chewed these food particles mechanically into smaller food particles. And conversion of larger food particles into the smaller food particles will make you other parts of the digestive process a very simpler one, and it will be now easy for your other digestive enzymes to digest the food particles which have been chewed or masticated already by making use of our teeth. In your previous lecture, you came to know if you will do a good mastication, good sort of chewing, then it will be easy for your gastric enzymes and other enzymes of your digestive tract to digest well on time and easily the different food items or these enzymes which are present in different parts of our digestive tract. It will be very easy for them to digest these food particles. Why so? It is because of the fact, say here it is the larger food particle, it has been converted into the lesser food particles, and it has been practically shown and seen that the digestive enzymes which act over different macromolecular substances of our food items, they act on the surface. They act on the surface. Sometimes some of your digestive enzymes will dissolve or degrade the peptide bonds, sometimes the glycosidic bonds, sometimes the ester bonds, sometimes other types of the bonds, but preferably they do all this by acting over the surface of your food particles. So once you grind the food particles well through this process, then you convert them into the smaller substances, and these smaller substances have then larger or more surface area. Once you have more surface area with respect to your converted food particle, then it will be easy for your different enzymes to degrade the larger substances into the smaller substances to get the monomer units which can then be easily absorbed. But here let us have a look over the nervous regulation or control for mastication or this chewing process. Say let me make a simple format of the brain here. 1 minute. Say this is the brain, and you know our brain has different regions, and here is an important region. This very region constitutes some of the reticular region of our brain stem. Say here this constitutes, remind it carefully and watch it carefully, that let us suppose that this is some of the region of some of the reticular region of what? Brain stem, isn't it? It is mostly associated with perception of taste. This region, with the help of its motor control, regulates the process of mastication. And mastication is not only being regulated by the reticular region of the brain stem which is having the association with the taste, it is also being regulated by another region which is located in the hypothalamus, and another region which is located in another part. Let me make use of another color. Here let us suppose this is another region known as amygdala, and another region including cerebral cortex, another region cerebral cortex. See these three regions. Number one is cerebral cortex, please remember. Another region of your brain, that is hypothalamus, actually some of it is region, isn't it? And number third region, amygdala of our brain. These are the three important regions, and some part of these three regions are associated with the perception of smell, isn't it? And with the perception of taste. Have a look here. Some of the region of cerebral cortex, hypothalamus and amygdala, which are associated with the process of with the smelling cells and with the taste cells. These regions have been found to be associated with the process of mastication, and this very region has been also found to be associated with the process of mastication. So all these regions are associated with what? With the process of mastication or chewing. Besides that, we should also remember here one more thing. Let us have a look over the diagram. In this diagram, I have shown here fifth cranial nerve, that is the trigeminal nerve. It has been seen that fifth cranial nerve or the trigeminal nerve is associated with the control or regulation of the muscles which are associated with the chewing. So here I will write down that this fifth cranial nerve, it is regulating or it is controlling the chewing muscles. It is controlling. When it is controlling the muscles, then it is controlling the chewing process. You know that the process of chewing takes place with the help of your different forms of different types of chewing muscles, and chewing muscles are skeletal muscles. So you are in a position to stop the process of chewing at your will, and that voluntary process of the chewing takes place because of the motor nerve signaling which comes into our buccal cavity, which comes or which is being innervated by the motor neurons of our fifth cranial nerve, that is trigeminal nerve. So we should remember here this very important thing, that chewing muscles are controlled by motor neurons of fifth cranial nerves. The motor neurons, please remember here this important point, that the motor neurons of what? Fifth cranial nerve are controlling the process of chewing, because they are actually controlling whole or all types of chewing muscles, and the whole process of chewing is being regulated by these different centers of our central nervous system. And we have seen that once the process of good process of mastication or efficient process of mastication or chewing will take place, that will lead to completion of efficient this format of our process of digestion, even in other regions of our digestive tract. Once you have completed the process of mastication or chewing, then the food won't remain as food. Then the food has been mechanically converted into the smaller substances, and it has been mixed with the saliva by making use of your hard palate, rugae, and especially your lips as well as your tongue. Then the food has been converted into different format, and this different format of the food will now be called as bolus. So far as the solid format of the food is concerned, it is the bolus, not the food, which has to be swallowed through the process of swallowing. So process of swallowing, if you will be asked a question that with respect to a solid format of the food, the process of swallowing is associated with A, food, B, bolus. The answer should be bolus. But if you will be asked another question that the process of mastication is associated primarily with number A, food, number B, bolus, then your answer should be food. because it is the process of mastication which converts the food into the bolus, and it is the process of swallowing which leads to inculcation of the bolus deep into our esophagus and stomach from the pharynx or from the buccal cavity. So, now let us have a look at the process of swallowing. The process of swallowing is also called as process of deglutition. Remember it, it is also called as process of deglutition. Let me check whether my phone is recording the lecture or not. Yes, it is recording. See, the process of swallowing is also called as process of deglutition. And the whole process of deglutition, in which we have to incorporate this bolus. Here I have made in the diagram this format, which is the bolus. Now it has to be incorporated deep into your pharynx, then into your esophagus through a process known as swallowing. This whole process of swallowing is completed via 3 phases. Number first phase is called as voluntary phase. Remember it. Number first phase of swallowing process is called as voluntary phase, and number second phase of swallowing process, 1 minute. Number second phase of the swallowing process or deglutition process is the pharyngeal phase. Number second is pharyngeal, most important phase in the whole process of the deglutition, and number third is the esophageal phase. Number third is esophageal phase. Whole process of deglutition is completed via 3 phases: voluntary phase, pharyngeal phase, and esophageal phase. Now let us have a look at the first phase, that is the voluntary phase. Voluntary phase, as the name indicates, is that phase in the process of swallowing in which you have to put the bolus into your pharynx. But the incorporation of the bolus into your pharynx is strictly under your will, under your control, because that is being regulated by your skeletal cheek muscles, isn't it? And you already know that the skeletal cheek muscles, which were associated with the process of the mastication or which were associated with the process of the chewing, they were being controlled by the motor areas of your 5th cranial nerve. And now, when we talk about the inculcation of the bolus into the pharynx, then our tongue is playing its important role. Once we have converted the food item into the bolus, then our tongue exhibits a particular type of the movement, in which our backside of our tongue is being lifted upwards and backwards. When our tongue, see here, in this voluntary phase, our tongue is lifted up. Whenever tongue is lifted up, isn't it? And at the same time, it is lifted upwards, especially it is backside region, and backwards. What it will do? Think for a while. The bolus which has been formed from your food by the mastication process, now your tongue is being lifted up under your voluntary control, isn't it? When it is being lifted upwards and backwards, what it will do? It will push the bolus deep towards the pharynx, so that inculcation of the bolus will take place into your pharyngeal region or into your pharyngeal canal. And this very process is regulated by your voluntary muscles, so this process is in the control or under the control of your will. And in this process, there is association of fifth, there is association of ninth, there is association of 10th cranial nerve, and there has been also seen that there is association of 12th cranial nerve as well. In this process, this fifth, then ninth, then 10th, and even 12th cranial nerve is associated. So trigeminal is associated with it, isn't it? Gllosopharyngeal is associated with it. I have made here this trigeminal nerve. This is the trigeminal nerve, and this is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and this is the vagus nerve, isn't it? And this is the 12th cranial nerve. All these nerves have been found to be associated with this voluntary phase of the deglutition process. And this deglutition process, including pharyngeal phase, including all the three phases, are in the control of a particular center of our central nervous system, which is called as deglutition center, which is located in our medullary region of our central nervous system or our brain. Say this is the medullary region of our brain or the brain stem region, and in this medullary region we have a particular center which I have made here, and that very particular center is known as deglutition center or swallowing center. This deglutition center is actually regulating the process of what? The process of swallowing. And we have seen the first phase of the process of swallowing and deglutition is being regulated by fifth trigeminal, ninth glossopharyngeal, 10th and then 12th cranial nerve. And the center of the brain which is controlling these processes is located in the medulla. That very center is known as deglutition center or swallowing center. So, after completion of the first process, then we have to switch on to the second process, that is the process of swallowing that takes place in our pharyngeal phase, isn't it? In this very phase, we have to take care of so many things. Number one, we have to take care of this very thing, that the bolus or any item from the bolus should not get incorporated into our larynx, isn't it? And one more thing, after completion of this very process of the pharyngeal phase, there should be caring of this thing, that the air should not pass deep into the esophageal region. So, in the process of the swelling which takes place in the pharynx, so many things have to be in check or have to be take place in a regulatory manner. So, in this second phase, that is the pharyngeal phase, which gets completed almost in 6 seconds. This phase is completed almost in 6 seconds. The whole process of swallowing in pharyngeal region of our gastrointestinal tract is completed in 6 seconds, and different events take place in this very phase. Number first, let me write down here. Number first thing, that is back side of our tongue is lifted up against the soft palate. Back side of our tongue is lifted up. Here the back side of our tongue is lifted up, as a result of which the vulla which is present in our soft palate, that also will be lifted up. When it will be lifted up, it will lead to closure of our internal nostrils. For a moment, that will lead to closure of our internal nostrils, so that any complication will not take place there. And when soft palate, including our tongue, is lifted up, soft palate, especially our vulla, is lifted up, then palatopharyngeal fold squeeze. Here we have palatopharyngeal folds. So these are These are the palatopharyngeal folds. These folds squeeze. And second event is palatopharyngeal folds. They squeeze. Think, once they will squeeze, what they will do? They will push the bolus to the deeper parts, isn't it? So the first process, soft palate has been lifted up. The second, palatopharyngeal folds, which are present in our phalanx from this and that, from the lateral sides, they will be squeezed. Once their squeezing takes place, their squeezing leads to inculcation of the bolus to the lower region of the pharynx, isn't it? And this palatopharyngeal fold squeeze and the squeezing takes place on an average for 1 second. And when this squeezing takes place, then the vocal cords which are lying within our larynx, they are also being lifted up. See here, next phase, vocal cords are also lifted up, including the larynx. When they are being lifted up, they are uplifting, the uplifting of what? Vocal cords, including the larynx. Their uplifting will ultimately lead to the closure of epiglottis. Once vocal cords are being lifted up along with the larynx, they will lead to closure of this epiglottis. When epiglottis will be closed, then there will remain only a single way for this bolus to be passed into the deeper region of the tract, isn't it? Then next process takes place, that is, there is lying a sort of sphincter. Here is a sphincter. Here is a sphincter. And this very sphincter is oftenly called as esopharyngeal sphincter. Esophageal, pharyngeal sphincter. Once these processes will take place, this esophageal, pharyngeal sphincter is relaxed. Think for a while. Once relaxation of the sphincter will take place, it means as if the opening of the gate will take place. When opening of the gate will take place, already all these things, the pushing of the foot towards the deeper side has already taken place, and all these processes will lead to easy inculcation of the bolus into the first part of our esophagus. And once the bolus is incorporated into the esophagus, then what happens? Then entire esophagus, then the entire esophagus, then entire pharynx, then the whole of the pharynx will contract. It will contract. So you have seen that in the pharyngeal phase of the swallowing or the deglutition, different events have taken place. The first event is that after lifting of the tongue, the lifting of the soft palate, including the gula, takes place, leading to closure of these internal nostrils. And then palatopharyngeal, these side folds, they are being squeezed for about 1 second. And then the lifting of the vocal cords, including the larynx, takes place, which leads to closure of what? Closure of epiglottis. Then esophageal pharyngeal sphincter is relaxed. Once this sphincter is relaxed, it makes an easy entry for the bolus to get incorporated into the first part of our esophagus, isn't it? And then the contraction of whole of the pharynx takes place. Whole contraction of the pharynx takes place. When whole pharynx will contract, it will lead to inculcation of the food item of the bolus into the first part of our esophagus through the esophageal pharyngeal sphincter, isn't it? Then there comes the third and last phase of the swallowing, that is the esophageal phase. the esophageal phase generally has to last for 8 to 10 seconds. But when a person is standing or sitting, then the esophagus remains in an erect position, and the inculcation or transportation of the bolus via the esophagus into the stomach is also being aided by the force of gravity. So, it never takes 10 seconds, it generally takes less than 8 seconds for esophageal phase of swallowing or deglutition. This phase is completed via two steps or two events takes place here. Number one is primary peristalsis. And number second is secondary peristalsis. Please look here carefully. The primary and secondary peristalsis are responsible for esophageal phase of deglutition or swallowing. Primary peristalsis takes place because of the inculcation of the bolus into the first part after almost a type of opening of this very sphincter. When opening or relaxation of this sphincter takes place, then the food item is incorporated here into the first part of the esophagus. Then different these muscles or myoentric these neurons are present here associated with the epithelial lining of what? Here are the myoentric neurons and some other neurons which are being these innervated by the neurons which are associated with the swallowing center. But here in this region, all the process will take place involuntary. Not only this region, including this very lower region, the process of swallowing is involuntary in the pharynx as well. Only the first process, that is the voluntary phase, which has taken place in the upper very region, that was voluntary. Now, when the bolus has been incorporated into the esophagus, then the incursion of the bolus into the stomach where the esophagus takes place because of primary peristalsis and secondary peristalsis. What do you mean by primary peristalsis? Primary peristalsis is being induced once your food item is inculcated via esophageal pharyngeal sphincter into the first part of your esophagus, isn't it? That is the primary peristalsis. This primary peristalsis is directly associated with this stem center of your brain, that is the swallowing center or deglutition center. And then there are other neurons which are also present lying associated with the epithelial lining of our esophagus, which are called as myoentric neurons. Here these are myoentric neurons. Once the food item is incorporated here, if the bolus is not being guided by the respective swallowing center to get incorporated with the process of the primary peristalsis, then myoentric neurons, which form the myoentric nervous system of the esophagus, then their activation leads to the another wave, the self-generated wave, which is called the secondary peristaltic wave. They also will result in the inculcation of the bolus into the stomach. In some persons, when paralysis in a condition, when paralysis of the brain or paralysis of this region of the brain or this very lower region of the brain takes place, then it is possible for that very person that in that person the inculcation of some bolus item or some liquid food item will take place in the esophagus, because at that time when this region has been degenerated or deactivated or paralyzed, then at that time the myoentric neurons get activated and they lead to the secondary peristalsis. and that secondary peristalsis leads to the inculcation or transportation of the bolus via the esophagus. So with this we have concluded the nervous regulation associated with the process of swallowing and with the process of mastication. Let me sum up my today's lecture very quickly, in which we came to know about the process of mastication and swallowing. Before that, we differentiated the process of hunger with the process of appetite. In the process of hunger, we saw that it is an intrinsic desire for food. In the process of the appetite, it is a state in which the type of food is being seeked preferentially by a person. Then we went through the nervous regulation of the process of mastication, in which we first came to know that in the process of the mastication or the chewing, we can generate a force of 55 pounds over our incisors and more than 200 pounds over our molars. And then we came to know the conversion of the larger food items into the smaller food items through the process of the chewing is efficient. It will lead to the efficiency of the enzymes leading to the process of digestion, which are present in other regions of our gastrointestinal tract. And we have seen that this process of the chewing is in the control of reticular region of brainstem, which are associated with the taste, and it is also being regulated by the cerebral cortex, by the hypothalamus, by the amygdala region of our brain, and some of regions of these very regions of our brain which are associated with the smell and the taste, they have been seen to be found associated with the process of mastication. And after that, we discussed the process of the swallowing or the deglutition, in which we saw that this process leads to the inculcation of the converted food into the bolus, or the inculcation of the bolus into the esophagus via pharyngeal canal and ultimately into the esophagus. And we have seen that the process of the swallowing or the deglutition takes place through 3 phases. Number 1 was voluntary, second was pharyngeal, and third one was esophageal. And we have seen that there is a specific nervous center which is lying in our medulla of the brain, which is called the swallowing center or the deglutition center, which is regulating the process of swallowing. And in the first process of the swallowing, we have found that the 5th, 9th, 10th and the 12th cranial nerves are, or their motor neurons or motor regions are associated with this process or with this phase of swallowing. And we have seen that in this voluntary phase, there is lifting of the tongue towards the upper side and the backward side, which leads to the pushing of the bolus to the first part of our pharynx. And in the pharyngeal phase, we have seen that how the whole pharynx contracts after so many events are taking place, like lifting of the vocal cords, lifting of the larynx, closure of the epiglottis, isn't it, and opening of this very sphincter, esophageal pharyngeal sphincter, isn't it, and these peripharyngeal folds squeeze, and we have seen all these events are leading to inculcation of the bolus through this very sphincter into the first part of our esophagus. And in the esophageal phase, we have seen that 2 processes are associated with it, that is the primary peristalsis and secondary peristalsis. Primary peristalsis is in direct control with the swallowing center of our brain, and secondary peristalsis is under the control of myoentric nervous system, which is associated with the esophagus. Since we know that in the esophagus myoentric neurons are present, and these myoentric neurons are regulating the secondary peristalsis. And we have also seen that if in a person the paralysis of this very region of the brain takes place, still in that paralyzed person, the swallowing in the esophageal region will still take place under the control of these myoentric nervous systems through secondary peristalsis. I hope you might are understanding me well. You might have understood my today's lecture. If you like my lecture, then do subscribe my channel and get notifications daily, and if you like it more, then you can share it as well. Thanks.